This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 18 and 21. What? 18, I'm keeping it in. 1821. Bryan and Peter are back, and we're talking Thor.
Simonson Thor.
Simonson Thor, right. What else is there? So how was your Pensic?
It was awesome.
Everything you wanted it to be?
Oh my God, yeah, it was incredible. Yeah,
cool.
It was tons of fun, and it was only like 10% of the normal capacity, but it was still really fun.
Do you ever find out like who they are, like what else they do outside of that, or does none of that talk really come up?
What do you mean?
Like
people?
Like what do they do for work, or
Well, I mean, people talk about whatever, I mean, like the way that it was, like your camp is, so because Pensic is so busy on a normal year, right?
Yeah.
Like these camps get established and groups of people get the same chunk of land every year, right? So we were camping with a guy that I know who has been doing it for, a long time.
Right.
So we camped with that camp. And so, there weren't tons of people. Normally this camp has like 80 people in it. And this year we had like 10, right? Because it just wasn't a lot of people. So, but like I knew what he did because we worked together, and like, we know he and his wife, and then we met the other people at the camp, and, so we were talking the whole time. It's not like a secret. It's like,
right,
when you're there, you're dressed, but your normal life is you just talk about whatever,
Yeah, right.
I met some other people talk about Star Wars and,
Of course. Yeah. So it's not like Ren Fair where like a lot of those people are in character all the time.
No.
Yeah. Did you go to the sea? The sea. Did you go to the shore? Adam's house with
I went just down for the evening and then like the next morning.
Yeah.
Because we had an archery thing Saturday afternoon, so I didn't want to miss that. So I drove down.
You have archery now.
Hell yeah.
Oh my God.
It's so much fun.
Wait, did you have archery in school as a kid? We used to have archery in grade school, in gym class and junior high. You didn't have that in like...
No, the only time I ever did archery was like at scout camp,
Yeah. So like I remember I even asked for a bow for like Christmas. I had this red bow, like this beautiful red bow that I would like like shoot into drop ceiling tiles or like into the wall, because like my mom down in the basement had like that just giveaway wall. And just like you go thunk and like right in. So I used to think, I was like, am I the only one who... I don't remember anybody else saying that they took archery in phys ed.
No, definitely not. Crazy.
What kind are you doing?
Well, we have through the STA, there's archery practice every Saturday. And so yeah, there's a bunch of people just come out and you just shoot. There's a 20-meter target, a 30-meter target, and a 40-meter target. And you just shoot,
This is all like life huntings. It's like skills for when the apocalypse comes, because we don't know how to do any of that shit.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, like quite frankly, yeah. I mean, like it is nice to learn how to aim an arrow, like that could be a useful skill,
Do you watch Walking Dead?
I did. We watched like the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 seasons or something.
They did a time jump in one of the later seasons by like years, which I don't think on some, it kind of works, but then I don't think it works. But anyway, the time jump was enough that hardly anybody had guns anymore. And then
they used all the ammunition.
Yeah, they used all the ammunition. So then the people that did have guns, that you always knew, like, they're going to be trouble because they have better. So everybody's firing, everybody's using bow and arrow and stuff like that. So it was a little like attention to detail thing that was kind of nice. But I kept thinking, yeah, who was it? I think I was talking to my sister or something like that. Where like simple things like fire, collecting water, like just dumb stuff. Yeah, like no, yeah, I'm gonna pick a berry and die, because I don't know what my berries are. But just hunting and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know that I could shoot an animal, but I could, I could shoot a target. It's no
Yeah.
problem.
It was just standing there.
Yeah.
That's funny. Oh, that's funny. What do you want to talk about?
Well, did you read those issues?
I did. Did you read them?
I did. Of course, I did.
Okay. So Thor. Bryan and I are finishing Thor, the Walt Simonson, the Surtur Saga, as it's called on that last issue, right? On that cover of 253, the Surtur Saga. We did this as the old footnotes episodes, and we only got up to issue 347, which meant we were 6 issues away from the finale, which was like, oh my God, we were so close.
Yeah.
And it was so weird reading. So we read 248. I actually went back and read everything again because I'm dumb like that.
Those are wordy comics, man. I don't know how you had time.
Right? Yeah. It felt that way. Like some of the later issues, I was like, it's still good, but it was still wordy. Like it's a half hour to read it, 20 minutes, half hour to read it. And I was like, damn, Simonson, you're a wordy bitch. But those issues 348 to 353, I mean, you could really just read those, and that is like the main Surtur stuff,
Yeah, because in the other issues it was just sort of like the the doom in the back or whatever, right. Like the 2 or 3 pages sort of building up to it. I mean, the Malekith stuff with the casket and everything, you sort of needed to know,
right?
You needed to just know that was a thing that got loose, but the rest of it kind of didn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised too, because I did go back and read it, and I actually listened to some of the early episodes that we did on it. Like the Beta Ray Bill stuff is still great. Like those 4 issues still total redefining. We talked about it in those episodes. People, one of us, it was only really like you, me, and Jamie, and then Adam popped in every now and then too. Things like, the grand mythic scale of it, the science fiction part of it, all that like character stuff, like was so cool. And then when I was reading the issues that we had already covered, little one-off things of like Balder the Brave, or Thor fighting Fafnir the dragon because that one old Viking was still left in the world, and he was the one that was the last seat in Valhalla, and he actually shows up in these issues here in like one little panel. And what was the other thing? There was another. And the whole thing with the Casket of Winters, Roger Willis, the guy that was like sort of the keeper of it. I was reading these issues. I was like, okay, Simonson basically folded all of those one-off stories or 1 or 2 issue stories, which we knew this was a grand arc, but I was so surprised at how much he folded it into all of these issues, especially the big battle in New York. And
everybody played their role. It all came together.
It was so fantastic. I mean, had you read these before?
I don't know that I actually ever read them.
I didn't. I read a bunch. I collected up to issue, I think it was up to this first issue, the 348. And then in back issue, I collected everything else in back issues, but I never finished it. I mean, that was part of the reason why we did the footnotes, to sort of do this thing. And I was like, these comics are less than 40, going on 40 years old. Yeah. And they hold up to stuff that's like, I was much more interested in reading this stuff than I was some modern comics.
I was having, and this is how we know we're just too fucking old, Peter, is I was reading these comics and I was like, I should just spend the rest of my life reading old comics.
Yeah.
There's still so many I haven't read, and my memory, I don't even remember the ones I did read, so I could just go back and reread all the stuff I already read. Why am I buying new comics? Who cares?
and being disappointed. Like, yeah, like the ideas are kind of the biggest thing I took away from this. I mean, we kind of always used to say, like, when you talk about those creators who have those definitive runs, like Frank Miller on Daredevil, that whole run, which I've read maybe 60% of. John Byrne's Fantastic Four, which I have read all of those. You know, I start to now include Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen, but really Paul Levitz on like Legion of Superheroes, because like Claremont, he wrote that book forever, and it really sort of redefined the Legion of Superheroes to the point that nobody has ever been able to go back to it, to that sort of, you know, high energy or interest or whatever. It's Claremont and Byrne, Claremont on X-Men himself. And we always used to say Simonson's Thor. And I think this is really the first time that I was like, okay, because it's the first time I really finished it. I was like, yeah, I get it. It's huge.
Well, and there's so much more. I mean, I have the omnibus. I mean, look how fat that thing is. It's literally almost as thick as my head. I mean, it's a lot of issues in this thing, you know.
How is it reading that kind of thing?
Well, you have to like, you don't really put it on your lap, crush your nuts. You know, you gotta like be careful. It's a little cumbersome, but it's a beautiful book because they recolored the whole thing. Every issue is recolored. It is gorgeous. You know, yeah. I mean, I know I've always been a fan of Simonson's art in general.
Right.
But this, like, you talk about holding up, like this book, especially this recolored version, like it feels to me like it competes with modern artwork. I think if you just took these pictures, maybe, you know, remove some of the word bubbles because that sort of gives it away that it's an older comic. Yeah. But if you just showed this artwork to, you know, a 14-year-old, I don't think they would know it was 40 years old. I think it would look like a modern comic, you know?
Right.
And that is also nice about this particular run.
Yeah. I mean, you think if this was 83, 84 when these books came out and we were reading it and talking about it, we would be thinking 40 years. If it was 40 years prior to that, it was the 1940s. That artwork rarely did artwork hold up.
Yeah.
Only those standouts, you know.
Right.
No, I feel that way too. I have the issues, so the pages are not as crisp, obviously, and there's, you know, I needed a lot of light to like the small words. I was really surprised his artwork in these early issues, early in his career, because this still feels like early-ish Simonson, you know, when he becomes Simonson, I guess you could say. There's not a lot of splash pages. They're only used for effect. It's sometimes very tiny panels going on the bottom or on the side. And I don't know, I guess maybe thinking of like Simonson during his like Orion run and later issues where the artwork does kind of get bigger. Mm-hmm. And he did X Factor too, right? Yeah.
Yep. He did X Factor. He did a Fantastic Four run in the 90s or late 80s or something. Yeah.
The X Factor stuff, I read a few of that, but that felt bigger, more open. And this because he has so much story that he wants to tell, you know, so many things that he wants to dip into, that I was really kind of surprised that he keeps it kind of minimal, but yet it's all there on the page. The character work, the armor, the buildings, the fight scenes are great. The pacing of it, so good.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly had a story in mind that he wanted to tell, and you know, he was playing with this. You know, that he loves the Norse mythology, and he's digging deep into it and playing with it, and you just know that this was his baby, right?
Yeah.
Like
he was born to do it.
Yeah, and good on Marvel for, you know, it being fairly early in Simonson's career to just hand him the reins to a major title and just be like, do whatever you want.
Right.
I mean, not necessarily whatever he wants. Obviously, he had an editor and stuff, but clearly they looked at his general pitch and went, that sounds amazing. No one else has had a good Thor idea for 15 years. So just take it, and it can't be worse, right? Or whatever.
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't say that because I didn't read Thor before this, so I don't know, but I know there's a lot of like mediocre Thor comics in existence. So, that's fine. But yeah, they had the vision to support him, whether it was Shooter or whomever said, yeah, that was smart thinking, because it paid off, man.
One of the letter columns, they said he really was only going to be on for like a year. But this whole run from 337 to 353 is 17 issues. Like, it's more than a year. And he keeps going. And he never missed an issue.
Yeah.
He might have had a different inker, like when Terry Austin inked or somebody else, but usually it was always him inking it. The artwork didn't suffer because of like any delays or anything that we know of, like this is all him writing and art, full art sometimes, for 17 solid issues telling this story that I was like, this is what we talk about, like those creators who could do it and did it, without any shortcut.
Well, and the other thing, like I was reminded in these issues, the one thing that I miss about from comics today is I just love so much when the artist who does the interiors does the cover.
Oh, yeah.
That continuity, especially when the artist is really good, right?
Right.
And, I consider Simonson to be really good. And it's like, you just get the whole package. You get to ogle the cover for 5 minutes and look at that thing of beauty, and then open the first page and there's the same artwork. And it's never, because that's what I hate, is when you get this like amazing artist to do the cover and then inside is kind of mediocre and you're like, womp womp. But it's like, no, with these, it's the whole deal. And it used to be so common for the artist to do the cover. Yeah. And like now that's super rare. And
well, I have to imagine it's more money, right? You get the cover plus the interior.
But it's another page you got to draw. So instead of drawing 22 pages, you essentially draw 23, So do they have time? And,
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously I'm assuming people have read it. We're not inventing the wheel when we say we're talking about Simonson's run, because there's a lot of people that have read it. But for the people who haven't read it, please, everybody should. I think it's odd that it's not as celebrated in many ways. And I know that's weird to say because there is a Thor Ragnarok movie, but it feels like we talk about it, like I talked about earlier. We always put it within this thing, but how many people have actually read it? And again, that conversation that we had last time about, it's kind of hard to get new comic readers to read something that's 40 years old, because we certainly weren't doing that, so how do you get them to read it? But when I say that this to me was like reading Dark Phoenix Saga for the first time, and I wrote some, like, I was writing, because I always write notes about every comic I read, and I was like, this is crisis level stuff. Like, this is huge, monumental, mythical stuff. They never mention the word Ragnarok. It's only in the title. Did you notice that? Nobody actually says it. So that actually, I thought that was an interesting point, because it involves Surtur. I don't know if that's why we just sort of assume that it's like a Ragnarok event, but there's no Fenris the wolf. There's no, I forget what the other elements are of that apocalypse, but it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The Casket of Ancient Winners crossed over into other Marvel titles. Like, I actually looked at a few other ones where it's, they were like, why is it snowing? And it's like, well, it's because of the thing, right? Does that omnibus have the Avengers issue that was?
No, it's just the Thor stuff, as far as I know.
Yeah, it was just sort of like a detour into Avengers, where the big battle in New York against the Demon Horde and stuff like that. A lot of those beats are he recreates them in one of the issues. So, and two things jumped out. One of the things that I think you mentioned in like one of those old episodes, you talked about like them handing him the reins for this. I think he looked at Thor and the supporting cast of characters and Asgard and went, hey, Marvel, you don't have to compete with Jack Kirby's Fourth World and New Gods at DC. You already have it. You just haven't done it yet. And I kept reading and reading this, and I'm like, this is Simonson saying to Marvel, you have the fourth world. Do something with it. Because the one when they're in the battle in New York, Reed Richards is like, oh my God, what is that? It's a doom tube. He says doom, not boom
Yeah.
tube, but a doom. I was like, oh my God, it's so obvious that Simonson's like, this is the fourth world. And they're like, how are you not? He was like, how are you not using Thor like Orion and all the High Father and Dark Side and all those characters? Sif is clearly like Big Barda, like, but these characters were created first. Kirby created all these babies way before the fourth world. So that was one big thing I got from reading all this.
Yeah. When what I like did a double take when I saw the Doom tube and I was like, oh yeah, right, like boom tube. And I was like, wait, this isn't DC. This isn't
Right.
a boom tube. Like, oh wow, all right. Like it just go with it.
It
And that was the
works.
only time they mentioned it. And it was just like, yep,
Yeah.
people warped in and that's cool. We just keep moving on.
Odin's his Odin power, which I love that origin issue for Odin and his brothers, because I didn't realize his Odin power is a mix of all three of the brothers, not just his own brother, right? And I was like, oh, see, now that reminds me of like Darkseid's Omega Beam power and his Omega power, and like, there's sort of similarities there. So I thought that aspect of it for Simonson, for him to play around with it like that, was such a revelation, and just makes me think like, wow, he really nailed the vibe of that whole cast of characters. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's so um normalized now, right? Like with the movies, it's like Odin's a character and Heimdall's a character and all these, Frigga's a character. Like they're not just like, oh, these people in the background or whatever. It's like they're major characters. And
Right.
now, a billion people around the world, like these are their household names now. And it's no big deal, like in here in one of the issues. Well, I guess the last issue, Loki replicates himself, a whole bunch of times to trick it. And it's like, that's a standard Loki play now, right? Like, I don't know, because I didn't read all the Thors before, and I'm not steeped in Norse mythology. So I don't know if that's like a normal thing or if Loki did that in, mythology or not. But it was just in this week's What If episode, he replicated himself. And there it was, like right there, like that's how one of the ways they won, like
I thought at that, and I was like, that's like Doctor Strange when he went up against Thanos and he replicated himself, and I was like, oh, there it is. They totally stole it from this. No, I'm sure that's a Ditko thing, whatever. But
did you see What If this week?
No, I'm behind. I even meant to watch Loki for our conversation, and I didn't get a chance to see.
Oh,
So
Peter,
I need to go. You know me. I need to go in order. So I need to.
I think the Casket of Ancient Winners was in this What If. They didn't call it by any kind of name. It was just like, it was a little box that was blasting out cold power, and I was like, oh, I know what that is. Like,
I think it was in one of the movies, because they had a trophy room in one of the Thor movies.
Yeah.
I think it was in there. I also meant to watch the Thor movies too, because you can really see how they pulled from. Because Simonson was even in one of those movies in like the background, I think, as like an Asgardian.
I know he was like a producer or whatever on one of the movies. Like they are well, there's sometimes 7,000 producers on movies, right? So I don't know. I don't remember what his title was, but he was, because they pulled so heavily from his source material, they, included him in some way,
The other element too that you mentioned, but also in one of the letter columns, they did, because I have the issues, they would always have like a question of the week, and the whole creative team would answer it, and then Jim Shooter would answer it with like some dumb response, but one of the questions was, who is your favorite author? I don't know if they said fantasy author or whatever, but Simonson says Tolkien.
Yeah.
And this really nailed. I thought there were a lot of moments that were like straight out of Lord of the Rings. Like Thor when he's fighting Algrim, I think the name, when he's falling, when they both fall down.
It was very Balrog, like,
Yeah.
yep.
Or even, Surtur, he looks like a Balrog, right?
Yep.
He looks like what I always think from those old, like, Ralph Bakshi, whatever that guy's name is. Bakshi, yeah, those cartoons. What was the other one? Oh, when Odin was like, call the council, I need to tell you the story. I was like, it's the Council of Elrond. Like, just whipping out the history of everything right then and there. Like, there were a lot of beats that I was like, you talked about this last time. When you do fantasy, you're going to hit certain beats, and this is fantasy, So,
well, and especially, if you take it back in time in 1983 or whatever, there still wasn't an abundance of fantasy books, right? You had a couple, that first, it might have been 83 when the first Dragonlance novel came out, right? So they're just like, now fantasy is very mature. There's fantasy has broken away from the Tolkien-esque fantasy. It's all kinds of new magic systems and, more, it's fantasy in like a Napoleonic setting, and it's fantasy in this kind of setting. And it's like, think Game of Thrones, there's like hardly any like supernatural creatures in it except for an entire army of the dead. But you know what I mean? There's not like giant trolls running around and, whatever.
Right.
But in 1983, there was basically the Lord of the Rings and not a hell of a lot else worth talking about. So when you talk about going to the well, there was really only one well. That was it. Right. So yeah, if you were gonna pay homage, there was only one thing you were paying homage to, and it hadn't been overplayed yet, I guess is my point. Like, there weren't 100 derivative books or 1,000 derivative books. So people were still excited to get those. Like, fantasy wasn't like a legitimate genre in 83, right? So if you were a fantasy nerd, that meant you were a Tolkien nerd. That meant you were excited to see a reference instead of being like, oh, it's so obvious he pulled it from Tolkien. Not in 83. You were celebrating. There was one of us, Yeah.
I mean, you think about like what fantasy, when we did get those fantasy movies in the 80s, they were so, I probably would look at them now and they're cheesy as hell, but like is it Legend? Is that
Legend
the Tom Cruise?
And Willow and
I guess you could say Never Ending Story, Labyrinth to some degree, like all those. But there also were other ones too, like Crawl. Like, didn't he have one? I guess that's more like, or Crawl or whatever.
Yeah, Crawl, and then there was obviously the Conan movies, and
What was there was a dragon one too, Dragon something. I don't remember. Some King Arthur one, But yeah, I could see that. I really liked it. I really liked that though about this, like, the inspirations were obvious. So you're right. Maybe in 1983, maybe they weren't as obvious only to like sort of the hardcore readers of those.
Well, and what's nice is it closes a loop, right? Because a lot of Tolkien stuff was pulled from Norse mythology. So, the dwarves are basically Norsemen, essentially, to some degree, right? I mean, dwarves were part of a Norse mythology, the idea of a dwarf, right? And he coalesce that into this modern idea of a dwarf, and but they were like, the rune system is basically Norse runes, right? And so by tying Tolkien into a Norse mythology story, he's completing the cycle, and so it feels natural,
It's like reclaiming it almost.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's actually what happens at the end, right? They're fighting the demon horde. The Asgardians are there, the Valhalla are there, humans are there, superhumans are there. So he has almost like his own battle of five armies going on right at the end, going up against, Sauron, and the having to go to Mount Doom. He used that word all over the place, but in this instance, it's Surtur trying to reach the eternal flame.
Even in the issues leading up to these issues, right? Like I said, like at the end of each issue where it would be like doom, doom, that's the sound that came out of Khazad-dûm. Right? Like it was like the drums of Khazad-dûm, like echoing down beneath. Like that's like basically the same idea.
Oh, right? That's so cool.
The menacing So yeah, there's lots of connections.
That's so awesome.
I just love that Simonson's just a big nerd, like in the most endearing way, right? I follow him on Facebook, and most of his posts are super nerdy stuff, or nowadays like writing eulogies for all kinds of creators who are leaving us.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, he's totally one of us. He just happens to be a really good artist.
He just posted on, was it Twitter or might have been on Instagram? He did uh, a recent like sketch. Maybe it was a commission or something, or for like an art thing or whatever. And it was Beta Ray Bill. Oh, I can't see my own camera. Where's my camera?
Oh, I almost saw it. Yeah.
You can see it's what's his face. It's Beta Ray Bill.
There it is. Yeah.
Right. Like, and I was reading the issues and I saw that and I was like, oh, Simonson. It's like you're reading my mind. Look at him. Look how cool he looks. I don't know how you want to talk about him. We have to do the old. I don't want to do the old format, going through page by page. But is there anything specific, or you want to just flip through an issue?
Well, I love. I was reminded. Obviously, we probably talked about it in the last issues, but the John Workman lettering, man, it's just all those classic sound effects.
Yeah,
and the crazy, bizarre sound effects, but in that classic style, like his lettering. Oh man,
did you notice? I mean, I really noticed it because, like I said, I read through the whole thing. So they were like really big and they looked almost blocky and chunky and big, right? But then there is a point where they start to look more like tiny little, every now and then, almost like street signs on top of panels, as opposed to being part of a panel. So like you'll get one or two shots of it almost looking like a little caption box instead of the big. But then they do go back to sort of the big stuff when they need it. So somewhere in like the middle issues, maybe in before these issues, you see these like every now and then it's like, oh, that's not as fun as the bigger ones. But maybe they did that because, I don't know, they got a lot more words.
Could be Crocodoom, Cthulhu, Grog. It's just some weird ones, but it's so great.
The one big thing about that you really get from reading issue to issue, and these later issues too, is how much foreshadowing and sometimes just out and outright, like, he basically just told us that Odin was not going to come out of this. And like, from Odin's mouth, there was a couple times where he even said, "Oh, Thor, if you only knew the future, you would stay by my side, but you need to go off and fight the demon horde." And it's like right there, like, but even in some of the earliest stuff, they keep mentioning Odin being tired. He keeps saying being tired, like when Balder goes and meets the Fates, the weird sisters, and they talk about, the thread of everybody's lives, and they specifically mention Odin's, his thread. And even if they don't say anything about it, reading it, I was like, yeah, maybe as a kid, I never would have picked that up, but reading it now, it's so obvious that he was going to take, and he does it in a way. I mean, I know this is like talking about a big point right away, but when it does happen, he mirrors what happens when the brothers were young, like somebody has to stay behind, and he says to his own sons, I give the future to you, or whatever he said. But then the coolest, what you said about reading older issues, like, I don't remember a modern issue hitting me like this. So the very last page of of 353, I'm jumping ahead, but like that father page, right, where both the sons scream it,
yeah,
is the same exact page from the very first Simonson issue when Thor loses his powers and Odin takes Beta Ray Bill because Beta has him, or yeah, and Donald Blake screams, "Father!" It's the same thing he did. It's a bookend.
Right.
Like when I turned to that last thing, and I was like, I got chills. I went, this mother effer, he knew what he was doing the whole time.
Yeah.
It was so good. That last issue, that whole fight, the just connecting it like the way he did. I don't actually have 337. I had to read it digitally. It just blew me away because I listened to the episode we did on that first issue, and we all were like, what a cool cliffhanger. Thor without his powers as Donald Blake, he doesn't have the hammer. Odin doesn't recognize it, takes him away, and the rain is coming down, and Donald Blake's father, and there they do it there at the last issue, and I was like, Simonson, wow, that floored me. It just really just knocked me out for a loop. So good, and it's in that big lettering, like you say, like it's just that huge font. Father. Let's talk. What do you think of Loki? Like, were you sort of surprised, or what did you think
when he came in there?
Yeah, like, what do you think of that?
Well, it was. I mean, I think that's. Yes, I was surprised, but then after I was surprised, I was like, well, of course, right? Like, because that's the thing with Loki is he likes to cause trouble, but when his brother or his father or even Asgard is threatened by someone other than himself, then he wants to be a loyal brother, a loyal son, and a loyal Asgardian, right? Like that's sort of his shtick, right? So of course it made sense that he would show up, also because he got to be like, I get to save the day. Like the whole thing would have been ruined if it wasn't for me. And so he gets to do things on his own terms. That's super Loki. And so it all fit together perfectly because, it would have been very easy to just have, Odin's, power of the cosmos be strong enough to defeat Surtur or have, his power of the cosmos with, Mjolnir come in and hit him at the same time and the two of them defeat him together. Like that would have been believable and still cool. And we would have gone, yeah, the good guys win. Like, all right, But then he did the best thing he could possibly do and have him be losing, and then Loki turns up and saves the day. It was awesome.
I was a little disappointed that because I know the cover for 353 well. Like it's such a beautiful image. Odin with his sons battling. They all kind of are messed up, Thor with his hammer, Loki with his magic, and Odin with his power. But as I read the issue right before it, where you said, they get Odin and Thor just get totally messed up, right? Like Thor's like knocked out on the Rainbow Bridge and Odin is like encased in snow.
Yeah.
I kept going. I knew this cover was coming. And I'm like, when is he going to drop Loki in it? Is it at the end of 352? Is he going to save it for 353? So I was a little disappointed that I wondered if you're expecting Loki and he's not in 352, but he's on the cover of 353, did that make anybody, like, do you get excited then because Loki's there? Does it ruin the effect a little bit? I don't know. It'd be hard to say because I wasn't reading it at the time. I wonder what somebody, I think maybe, I don't know, as an editor, I might have been like, well, if you're going to use Loki so obviously on the cover, and he's with Odin, like don't maybe save that for like the cliffhanger of the previous issue, but who knows, I shouldn't, who am I to judge Simonson, whatever.
Well, I mean, I think about it and I guess the one thing that I guess people would, I wouldn't be able to argue with people who like the trend that started, I don't know, late 90s or early 2000s, where you just had a random artist doing a cover for a comic and it was always just like a random picture. It's like, here's a cool Spider-Man pose. It had nothing to do with the contents of the comic. Well, the benefit of that is there's no spoilers.
Right.
But in every cover that has something to do with the interior, on some level, it's a spoiler of some kind.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not an obvious spoiler like this, like, oh, Loki's going to show up, right?
Right.
Whereas, like, I had completely forgotten about Loki as I'm reading these 6 issues.
Because he's not in him.
Not in him. Yeah. So, I could see how that could be tricky, but I don't think they were nearly as sensitive about spoilers in 1983 as we are
Sure.
now.
Yeah, half the time when you saw the cover for the first time, it was when you were buying it,
yeah,
if not all the time.
exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't buy every issue every month because
Right.
of the random nature of newsstands and everything. You just didn't,
Yeah, I agree. I loved his appearance. I laughed when he says to Surtur. Surtur's like, "What? My sword? It doesn't work." And he says, "Many questions, mighty Surtur. One answer." And he's just sitting there flicking his fingernails.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But I also like that Simonson, like what you mentioned, he didn't have Loki and Thor and Odin sort of at each other's throats while they were doing this. They just knew what they had to do, teamed up together. Odin was like, my sons, and the two. I don't even really think they had any kind of like, well, except for the one page where they're like, what was that one page? For Asgard, for Midgard,
for Loki,
for
myself. Yes.
That's classic Loki. But really, they were together. They were a unit, and Simonson saving Loki for that last issue that made me appreciate, because Loki, to me, especially the way they use him in the movies, is more of a reflection, I thought, of Loki in the comics right before that time. Like when Loki was made young and when Loki was turned into a woman, and sort of like that personification of Loki, and didn't realize how much of that flavor came from this, really. Like, and maybe some of the early, maybe something earlier, but the way he was needling Balder in one of those early issues, and just, he's not completely the actor that plays him, and you don't expect it to be. This is from 1983, 84, but I was like, oh, see, this is a cool Loki. And now it makes me want to, like you mentioned, Simonson keeps going after this. What the hell is the fallout from all of this? Like, because you notice who tells Thor what to do when it comes to defeating Surtur? It's Loki. Loki says, "Destroy Surtur's footing. Thus shall we send him back to the." It's almost you could maybe say he knew that if you knock Surtur down, Odin was going to
go with him.
Yeah, right. I could really see that being a part of. I don't know if it comes out in the other issues because I haven't read them, but I'd be curious, because he is Loki after all.
What did you think of the little like side quest with the Frigga and the kids and the troll?
So there's humor in this book. The Simonson does have some things that are kind of like funny little, like Volstagg sitting on people, and I don't know. It's not like it's a funny book, and it's not like it's a comedy book, but I do feel like he tries to do some fun things. And I felt like first of all, I thought the young kid was Loki. I thought it was Loki trying to be in the field, but not as himself. And then maybe he was trying to either get on the battlefield, or he really truly was trying to protect Frigga for some reason, even though it's not his mom. You know what I mean? So I wasn't sure of that. Then when they got into the whole thing of the troll thing, I was like, I mean, he really is covering his bases and trying to show all the various sides of this army, this battle, this war. So on one hand, I thought I was going to get like a little, not annoyed, but I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. But I actually kind of liked it. I don't know. What did you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, he definitely didn't drop a thread, right? Like, Frigga has to take the kids and get them to safety, and he doesn't just assume they went and hid in a cave and then came out. Like,
right.
they had a little danger too. I I I liked it for two reasons. One was the troll was just super cool to look at. Like it was just like a really pretty like bit of like fantasy artwork, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
But also it's like even the children of Asgard are not afraid to,
Yeah.
get into, a little brawl, right?
Right.
And that whether he intended to, like have that have meaning or whether it was just a little fun thing, I don't know. But I kind of like it that they didn't just run away or whatever.
Yeah. No, you're right. When the one first stands up and is like, no, we're staying. And then Odin's like, come here. I know what you need to do. You need to go protect Frigga. That's going to be your role. Like, you're right. Like, these are Asgardians after all,
Yeah.
And it totally did make sense. And yeah, I think you're right. Like, it's to show that even the young are, they're everybody's going to stand up. Everybody's going to stand up for against this demon. I really like Balder, his journey, which gets resolved in the issues that we're reading when he finally does meet the fates and he kind of just opens up his eyes and say, yeah, I'm a god. Everybody has, what does he say? There are consequences. There are, who am I to, no man or God can set aside the fate of so many as I have tried to do. Like the whole meeting of the sisters, when Odin says, Balder, go get Carnilla on our side. And then she's like, okay, if you stay with me, basically, if you marry me is, I guess, what she's saying, if you're like my consort. And he just laughs and kisses her. And he's like, he's sort of back to his old self again. And he's like, oh, you're so silly. We're doing this, lady. It's like, no, I just went through heaven and hell, literally. And we're doing this because you're going to do it, I liked his character a lot in this, and just the way Simonson uses him.
Well, and it was very sort of subdued. Like he was never really like trying to be heroic. He was just like doing what he needed to do.
Yeah.
And just not glorifying it in any way. It was like, this is my mission in life. Like this is my lot. And I'm just gonna play my role. And so it was very heroic in its subtlety, right?
Right. And showing a different side, because we have Thor, you have Beta Ray Bill, but there are other heroes in this. Sif is sort of the warrior princess, whatever they call the warrior woman. And then you have Balder, who's supposed to be, the high point of all Asgardians, whatever, going through this crisis of faith. Let me see. I'm looking through 349, that origin issue. Oh, so the other aspect that I mentioned, there were three now that I think about it. Kirby, the whole Fourth World stuff, the Tolkien stuff, and then the movie stuff, right? Like the whole origin of the brothers kind of being literally and figuratively on their high horse that they're going to go. So this is issue 349. They want to see the realm. They want to see all the realms, and they go to Muspelheim. I think that's how you say it. And they egg on Surtur. And they start this whole thing, basically. And I was like, that is straight out of the first Thor movie when Thor and his group is going up against the Frost Giants, just because.
Right.
And then Odin has to step in. I was like, look at that. That was a great little parallel.
Well, the other thing that isn't resolved in these issues, so that we'll have to keep reading so that we know what happens, is the whole bit with, Melody and like charming Thor and whatever, right? And that guy diluted this stuff, but he's still sort of under her spell. And I love that Odin knows it. He's like, but I'm not gonna mess with my son's love life. Like, let him learn his lessons or whatever. And it's like, wow,
He says, oh, he's in love with another mortal woman again. Yeah. That was funny. She was an interesting character. I never really could. I was like, what's, did Simonson just not want to use Enchantress again? So he creates this, because this is her first appearance in all these issues, and he just makes her a sister. I don't know if that's part of the mythology that,
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
because I love Enchantress. She's one of my favorite Thor villains, maybe favorite Marvel villains. I don't know why, but I like her design. It was great to see her show up, and even those characters were not villainous. They were like, "Yep, we got a job to do. We're gonna do it." So Enchantress goes for Melody, Lorelai, and she's like, "Hello, you need to," and she's like, "No." And I was like, "Yeah, that's the one part of this." I was like, I don't understand what Simonson's trying to do." So you're right. I guess we're gonna have to read on to find that out.
Hey, I want to interject here because something you just said like resonates with me a lot. And as comic fans, sometimes we complain about this with movies, but I feel like it's for a reason. So you said, the Enchantress is one of your favorite villains. And one of the things you mentioned is you just really like her costume, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the reasons that we like certain heroes or certain villains is because of these crazy costumes that they wear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when the movie studios create the movie versions, they always tweak the costumes because all this spandex wouldn't look good on TV, right? And I understand that, like in real life, spandex like bunches at the elbow and whatever, like it doesn't work right. But part of the reason that we love these characters is because of exactly the way that they look. Like I used to like Havoc was like one of my favorite X-Men, not because I gave a shit about Scott Summers' brother, but because his costume was cool and he had those and he shot the little circles out of him. Also part of it was Simonson's doing because he drew some of that stuff. And it's like I couldn't tell you the first thing about Alex Summers, like, and why he's cool. I just really, really liked his costume,
right?
And if they ever put Havoc in the movies, there's a really good chance he won't have that costume, right? And so then is he as likable a character, right? Like then it's all about the characterization. I mean, they have costumes, and some 14-year-old watching a movie for the first time may say, "Oh, I really like that costume," and maybe they'll feel the same way. But and this is definitely a tangent here, so I apologize. But like in the Avengers movies, like Hawkeye, his costume doesn't look. It's barely a costume. It's like a leather vest or whatever, a coat or something, and it's like he's not really Hawkeye without some sort of visual identity, right? And it's like, oh, you just took away a whole big part of what made Hawkeye cool in the comics, right? So I do think, like, I know that a lot of times comic fans just bitch because it's different from the comic, and sometimes it's okay to be different, right?
Yeah.
But I do wonder if that is taking away from some of these characters in their film versions and making them less instantly likable because there's not as much visual to grab onto.
Well, maybe because comics are so visual. Like, so I'm reading, I think I mentioned this before, the Claremont X-Men stuff, right? With Cockrum and I'm up to issue 10 something. They're going to go meet the Shi'ar for the first time. And this is it's Jean Grey is Phoenix, but she's not Dark Phoenix yet. And Banshee's on the team, and so we're not at Byrne yet. And what's really hitting me is how Cockrum's design of like a character like Storm, not only her costume but the way she flies or the way she uses her powers, like he's drawing panels that I thought Byrne first kind of did, and I'm realizing Cockrum is the one that he didn't define the X-Men he didn't make them popular, but he did sort of set the ground rules of what their powers look like, what they like. Even Nightcrawler, there's scenes of Nightcrawler running up a wall, and I'm like, oh my god, I thought Byrne did Nightcrawler like that. No, Cockrum did, So in comics, because they're so visual, you want Storm to look like Storm, right? Because it's shorthand for your eyeball. You don't have to try to figure out who it is, you know. Think of nowadays, man, they're changing their costumes left and right all the time, you know, and it's like they're not as comfortable to look at because they're either always different or they're too designy. You know, there's just too much in it. So to your point, maybe the reason why it's not so, it doesn't, the visual sort of flips because we actually see these characters move and talk. So for maybe a lot of people, it's the feeling that they get from the characters, not necessarily by by what they look like, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I'm just saying, like, it's a different part of our brain that is activated. Like, part of the reason that every comic book reading fan likes a character is because of the way that character looks.
Right. Because we have to fill in the gaps for everything else.
For all the other things, right? And so that is not necessarily taken away, but adjusted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now you like characters maybe for different reasons or different looks, which is okay. But I think the looks, purposefully in Hollywood, the looks are more subtle because it is easier to make look real and not stupid, which I totally understand. Like, I'm on board, but I just thought it was I never really put that piece together until you said that about Enchantress. Like, Enchantress is a great example because you got those crazy rings on her stockings, right? Mm-hmm. Like, when Tasha made the Enchantress costume, like, she put the tights on her legs and then painted the circles on because they had to be painted when they were stretched out, because if you try to do it when they weren't stretched, they'd get all warped and weird when you pulled the tights on. So, like, that was a whole process. It was a pain in the ass doing that costume, right? Now, I think it looks cool, and I think if we made it look reasonably cool for Dragon Con, Hollywood could figure it out, right? But they won't, they wouldn't, they'd do something different, right? So anyway.
Hollywood goes the other way, right? When they do make the costume to look like the original, it's meant to be not silly, but it's meant to evoke comic book, like what they did in WandaVision, like when you see the character. Or like, it looks perfectly fine, but it's not something you're not going to watch of Avengers Infinity with the way Vision looked in that.
Right. No, I mean, and in some cases, like, I think they've done amazing jobs. Like, by and large, I think some of the costume choices are really great. But there's a part of me that just wants to know, like, what would it look like if they actually could just do good spandex? You know, like, could we just have some classics? Like, spandex is not spandex. Like, I don't want to see the stuff bunching up around Vision's crotch, right?
You just don't want to see it's not leather, but, you know, like, you don't want to see that material. You don't want to see the 1,000 lines, you know, pockets and just.
Well, I don't necessarily. Some of that I kind of like because it feels like modern and interesting, but I want texture. It to be super evocative of the original. Like, I want the bright green of the Vision, but it could be in that new synthetic, interesting material that, you know, looks good on camera. Like, that's okay. Don't make it look different. You know, like, I'm just curious what that would look like. You know, I don't know. It's completely silly, but
we got. Havoc was in X-Men First Class. I totally forgot. Because when you mentioned Havoc in the rings, I was like, wait a minute, I thought we saw. And
Did we?
Yeah, in X-Men First Class when it was.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It was Mystique, Havoc, the guy that could, Darwin, who didn't last long, and the Angel character.
I basically try to pretend those movies don't exist, and I'm just waiting for Marvel to bring in X-Men correctly, and because
he did the way he did his powers. I think it was almost like he was doing like a hula hoop thing. Like, he would go like this, and then then it would come out. So it was sort of a ring, kind of, but not really. So, yeah, I went back to watch those X-Men movies again because, you know, they're sort of like all superhero movies. I'm going to watch them regardless of what I think of them, you know, or whatever. I was surprised that the newer ones, First Class, Days of Future Past, especially First Class and Days of Future Past. Days of Future Past, because they have, you know, they got Michael Fassbender and they got who plays Professor X in those movies.
What's his face? Right.
Yeah. not to say that their acting is miles above the other actors, but there was a certain, I don't know, like the X-Men movies got like a bump, because especially like Michael Fassbender, like get the, but I was actually kind of bored with those movies, the most
They're
recent.
not good, Peter. They're
I was
not
really kind
good.
of surprised. Yeah, I was like, wow, these are not as good as I thought when I first watched them.
I didn't really like any of them the first time, like when I watched them. I thought the original X-Men movie was very good, especially for its time and place. Like, and the
Right,
cast was like spot on, right? They
right.
nailed it. And the costumes, like there's an example of where they took reference from comics and the more 90s style, like just wearing jacket. Well, there was the whole Grant Morrison. Well, that was
Mm.
that later, or was
That was
that
around the same time.
right around the
Yeah.
same time? I don't know which came first, but it felt fine, right?
Right.
And then the second one, some people really, like some parts were better than the first, and other parts were sillier than the first. And then the third one, like again, there were scenes that were awesome, and the I'm a juggernaut bitch, like that was great because they put the joke in or whatever. But overall, the movie
Seeing
was pretty
Colossus.
ridiculous. Or seeing
Seeing
Colossus
Colossus was
was very
cool.
cool,
Yeah.
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 So there were some great parts, even if the movie itself wasn't very good, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But then, this new generation, like the second wave, like I just the mood was all wrong, and the whole vibe was just not. It
Yeah.
wasn't what we needed, right? And by that time, the Marvel movies had started coming out. So then it was like, well, this doesn't count anyway because it's not a Marvel movie. Like the first three were fine because there was no Marvel universe yet,
Right.
right?
Right.
But once the second ones came out, it was like, oh, this is like your own little sandbox, and then this is continuity. So why do I even care? Like
The one of the best scenes in all of those X-Men movies is the Nightcrawler attacking the White House
oh
when he's
yeah,
constantly just bamfing all over the
yeah,
place.
yeah,
That is because that doesn't matter if it's who owns Fox, right? It was Fox at the time, right? Yeah,
yeah.
it doesn't matter if it's Fox, it's Disney. That is just taking the character and his powers and throwing it throughout that whole opening. When I got to that second movie and I watched it, I was like, it's almost worth it just to watch just that and then
Yeah.
turn it off. It's so good. So good. Yeah. It's so interesting how there is I mean, they've absorbed all that. They're going to absorb it or they will, everything. But like even like the Spider-Man movies, right? Like there's been a plethora of Spider-Man movies that have existed. Like you said, the first trilogy is more or less pre Marvel.
Yep.
And then the second two seem like this. They almost seem like a directed DVD type.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Now when I watch them, I'm like, ooh, I'm not a fan of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Like
No.
that Electro one is not. It's not good. It's not good. I'm not entirely in love with the new trilogy either, or the new one. I still, my heart still kind of belongs to the Sam Raimi one. 1 and 2. Those are just so good.
I mean, I really like Spider-Man himself. Like I think in these new ones, like that is the most perfect Spider-Man we've seen on film.
Because he gets to play with the other heroes too,
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, right? It's like Spider-Man. Yeah, there's plenty of issues with Spider-Man where he's just doing his own thing, but there are so many tiny cameos in Spider-Man comics where he talks to Daredevil on a ledge somewhere for 3 panels and shares a slice of pizza or whatever. Like that's part of Spider-Man. So like he needs to interact with other characters to really like be himself, and then just to make jokes constantly and do dumb things because like Peter Parker is one of the smartest people in the Marvel universe, but he's also does some of the dumbest things, right? Like, and that's the dichotomy of that character, right? So they nailed it from that personality. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just trying to go back to the issue. I think like I'm just going through 350 now. That's the big battle in New York. Surtur is so freaking cool. He's so giant. First of all, he's a giant. He's so big. I love Simonson's look. Like, it's not really a face, but it's also not really fire, but it is, but it's not, but it's like a sun almost, but yet is he a dragon? Is he a Balrog? Is he a what? Like, he's so cool looking. It's like nightmarish.
Well, I think what's interesting, we probably talked about this in the earlier episodes, is the whole look for Asgard and Asgardian stuff, like the armor, like Odin's armor and stuff. It's not like old armor. It's like modern futuristic armor. Like it's mixing an old with a
Yeah.
new, right? And that's and they definitely use that in the movies too, where Asgard was almost like a space city, but yet they still wore armor and carried spears. They didn't have laser guns. Like
Right.
it's this interesting sort of blend.
Because I think Simonson still wanted it to be a superhero book, or knew that it had to be a superhero book. It's
Right.
even if he's doing all this other stuff, like, but you're right. Like every time Odin puts on armor, it looks like it could be armor for a 20-foot tall guy, or that it weighs 5 billion pounds, but yet he puts it on and it be, with the giant horns whenever he puts the horns on and things like that. Yeah. The end of 350 where New York is burning and Thor's like, well, I can take care of that. I'm the god of thunder and storm.
Yeah.
And they calls down the rain and they're like, okay, but now we can't see anything.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll make it go away. And then a rainbow shows up. Simonson doesn't say anything about it, right? He just shows the rainbow. And then at the end of the issue, they all realize, I think it's in the last panel, Thor's like, oh no, I created the rainbow.
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool. I thought that was it was so obvious how he was going to get there. When Thor was like, oh yeah, I'm going to call down the thing, I went, oh no, I know exactly what it's going to do. That was a great moment.
I also liked in the big battle where they have their like two different forces, and they use like the shadow of he uses the shadow of the World Trade Center to, like, they're hiding behind the tallest buildings in New York, one on each side, and then they attack them in the middle. That was like a really great way to really tie in New York City in a sensible way.
Yeah.
Like that just was practical, and that was pretty cool.
And that was Beta Ray Bill, right? Because like Thor's like, oh no, Surtur's up in Asgard. Beta Ray Bill, you need to take control of everything. And like, to go back to those early issues.
Wait, wasn't it was it Sif on one side and the other dude on the other, or was it Beta Ray Bill? I can't remember.
But Beta Ray Bill came up with the idea of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a couple panels earlier, he was like, here's what we're going to do. Because remember, he told the people from Valhalla, he goes, I want you to charge them, but when they break, you retreat. And they're like, what? We're not going to retreat. We're Asgardians.
Oh, yeah.
He goes, no. And like one of the other characters like, no, listen to him. And the whole point was so that they would follow them to the Twin Towers, and then the two forces would be waiting for him. Yeah. I just like that. To go back to like those early issues and the early episodes, we were I think Jamie was speculating, we were talking about how this is Odin's plan. He needed another warrior because he knew he would need like all the warriors he possibly could have for a big battle. And that's why, when Beta Ray Bill and Thor initially fought, they fought in a world kind of like in the world where Anakin and Obi-Wan were fighting, where it was all lava and whatever. And it's like, yeah, because Beta Ray Bill would be like, oh, no problem. I come from the burning galaxy. This is not going to be a problem. And it's like he almost willed this other warrior because maybe he knew they needed, the power of both of them. So Simonson, again, backtracking, going, okay, I created this character. Now I'm going to show you why. He's going to he's going to run the whole armies of the Battle of the Flying Armies or whatever. So beautiful. Simonson's just smart. It's just everything about it is smart. Just I rarely, when you see like stories, there's only a few series that I can think of that had major plot points in the early issues that came around successfully in the last big story. James Robinson's Starman was chock full of that. Like when you read the first 2 years and then you read the very last story and everything sort of comes right back around again. You go back to the early issues and go, oh my God, it was all there. It just was all there. And like a lot of writers try to do that. And sometimes they're, but there's always like one or two things that falls away. Simonson had a checklist or something and was just like, oh, there's that. Oh, there's that. I got that. I got Carnilla. I got Balder. I got Sif. I got, Beta Ray Bill coming back. This is a phenomenal run.
Imagine, I think not to take anything at all away from Walter, but I think we should put everything into context, right? He's married to one of the greatest comic book writers, and so imagine what their dinner table discussions are like. Yeah. Can you imagine, like, Wheezy, I have, I'm not sure how to wrap this Balder thing up. Like, you got an idea, like, or whatever, like, because obviously every writer gets stuck at some point. That's just the nature of writing. But then he had another grade A top class writer in his house at all times to run ideas by and hash things out. So I would love to know, like, which part of this saga was Wheezy's idea, because certainly there's got to be at least one thing in here that she, threw him a bone and had an idea, right? Like, and that's so cool. Like, just what a powerhouse of I love that. Like, can you just imagine how nerdy their kitchen table talk was, because she's writing books and he's writing, oh man.
And I think she was more of an editor at this time, I think.
I think so, yeah. Because I don't know when she started doing a lot of the writing. When did New Mutants come out?
She didn't start that though, but that was around this time. She was late. I think X Factor was really sort of the first time I remember.
X Factor was like 86, right?
Yeah.
So this is 2 years after this, but she wrote something before X Factor, right?
Yeah, she had to have. But he also has really great editors. Like, it's Mark Gruenwald, Archie Goodwin. I mean, like, he had people around him and Kirby. Like, I'm sure there are elements of this that trickle back to Kirby,
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
That I just am not aware of, So the other thing, so especially reading the last issue, so the other thing he does, first, he does something really cool. Issue 352 is, the second to last issue of this. It's got a lot of Odin versus Surtur. It's got Johnny Storm and Roger trying to, super glue the casket of ancient winners together, which I thought was hysterical. It's got the Battle of New York. Thor is not in that issue at all. I thought that was great. It was only until like the very last page where I was like, oh my God, I just realized Thor was not in that issue. That's awesome. That
you don't even need him.
You didn't need him. Brilliant. Okay. And also that Surtur uses, again, to prove that Simonson was creating these things, but then ultimately had a purpose for it. Like the Casket of Ancient Winners was a cool thing. Marvel got to play around with it with other titles, but then he also encases Odin in it. Like, I almost thought. So here's the other thing I thought: when Surtur was like, right before, he's like, I'm gonna call on the most ancient, the thing that's been, before even me. The cult. I almost thought he was bringing Ymir back, which Odin talked about in the origin as. I think the brothers killed Ymir, the frost giant, and they made, like, they say, out of his body we made the earth, out of his soul we made the clouds, or whatever. I almost thought that's what Surtur was going to do, but that's not what happened. So anyway, but then Simonson's like, no, this is the other reason why I'm having the Casket of Ancient Winners, because it's the one thing that can stop Odin. Like, that was just so awesome. So then we get the final issue, and especially the cover and the father and son's missing. To tie it back to the movie talk a little bit, I was like, oh, That's what I was missing from the Ragnarok movie was Odin being Odin. Because we got Thor being Odin almost in a way. But we didn't get that cover. We never got
Right.
that cover of the three of them together, right? So that was because I thought that last issue was just fantastic. Just it was emotional, it was action oriented. You knew they were going to win, on some level, but there's a cost to it. The artwork is phenomenal. Um, and you can see how the movie took from that. First of all, the titles are silly, right? Ragnarok and roll,
Yeah.
like right there. Same thing that, same with the kind of music that they used for the movie. But
That's actually a really good. I, you know, the kid, my Clara and Hazel are always talking about. They hear that Zeppelin song and they're like, "Oh, that was in Thor." Like they thought it was so cool that they put a Zeppelin song in Thor, and I never put two and two together that maybe the producers of that movie said we got to put a rock and roll song in because Simonson, deemed it.
well, I was always like, and they're starting to use it too much now when they're starting to put it's like in the Titans TV show that I just the new season kicked off, and there's a battle, and it's not an important battle, but it's just against some thugs, and right away they jumped into like the new music, and I was like, like, we grew up on John Williams and Danny Elfman, and not to say it always has to be that way, but it does mean something, So anyway,
Right.
So I did the same thing. Again, I get to read the letter columns because does the omnibus have the letter columns?
No, unfortunately, it doesn't, which is a shame
I know.
because,
There's so much information in it.
yeah, I know.
Well, they mentioned that Howard Chaykin was the one that gave them the idea to do Ragnarok and Roll. Now, I don't know if they mean the exact title or the
Interesting.
design, but they keep up with it, right? Ragnarok and Roll 2, and then what's the last one? Something about Doom.
Well, there was Doom, but there's Ragnarok and Ruin.
Right. And then Doom 2.
Yeah.
But the whole Ragnarok and Roll, I did the same thing you did. When I looked at it, I went, oh, okay. I can forgive them now a little more for the Led Zeppelin music because he's clearly playing around with this. So
I loved I was a big fan of the Zeppelin thing because I thought, I like that our superhero movies are filled with orchestral stuff. And I think that's very powerful and emotional, right? But
yeah,
we live in a world where we hear and these heroes live in a world where, like, if Thor's going to Earth, at any point he could have heard an MP3 of Immigrant Song and then went, that's the song that's playing in his head while he's fighting all these dudes. Like that's totally believable. It's not a world that if they played it in Star Wars, it would be completely ridiculous. But in Thor, it makes sense.
Yeah, they did it in Star Trek when they brought out the Beastie Boys.
Yeah,
song.
well, and that was contextual too because it was like
it was
an old,
actually
an old thing. Yeah, it was like it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to think that 150 years from now or 200 years from now, whatever Star Trek is supposed to take place, that people will still be listening to Sabotage because it's a great song. It deserves its place in history,
Yeah. So silly. Yeah, but I did miss that. I did miss the three of them together in the movie. But the issue itself is like I wrote somewhere before 353. I was like, this is crisis level. If this was written in modern comics, it would have been an event. In fact, they did an event called War of the Realms, which was kind of like the same thing, where just trolls and frost giants and blah blah blah. But here it is in 1983. Crossover events aren't the du jour, and they're not even titled sometimes, only after the fact. And I was like, this is a huge, huge storyline. So I'm ready. If we want to keep reading, I have a few more issues. I'll have to get the rest digitally.
I'll definitely keep rereading. Like
in the early episodes that we did, the other one you said we should read was the Jurgens Thor.
I've been thinking about it off and on because they did a Ragnarok. Like that was like a real full blown Ragnarok storyline. That's how it culminated. And, I know that I have this insane love of John Romita Jr., which some people don't share, but I think that series was really good. And it was, what was it, 60 issues or thereabouts? But like it was Jurgens the whole time, and it was it John Romita Jr. most of the whole time? Like maybe he didn't finish it up. Who I don't remember now. Maybe what's his face took over, the guy that sort of draws like John Romita Jr. That well, whatever. I don't remember. But I thought the story was really, really good. Like I bought it because John Romita Jr. was drawing it. And then I actually fell in love with the story. And I was compelled to read because of the story, even after John Romita Jr. stopped drawing or whatever.
Right.
So I feel like that's how that went down.
So I'm seeing like Tom Rainey.
Yeah, Tom Rainey is who I'm thinking of.
Andy Kubert on an issue.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Did he finish it up, Andy Kubert?
Looks like maybe Joe Bennett.
Oh.
If I go to Thor 60, Joe Bennett, who's doing...
Was Kubert on it for a bunch of issues, though?
Maybe. I have to go issue by issue where I'm looking, so it's like I don't have the... he probably did a bunch, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that was a good series, and I actually would like to reread the whole thing. And I think I had some issues, like there were some issues in the middle where I dropped it. You know how you call your list for a while and then you're like, oh, it's been 6 months, I missed this book, and then you pick it up again, right? And there might have been like a year's worth or something in the middle that I didn't read, and then I got pulled right back into it because I missed it and it was so good, right?
Romita in the DC universe, not as effective.
I agree.
Yeah, like
I did like him on the Superman, on the most recent, was it Action that he drew?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I did like that. I think I'm just a sucker for him. But
when he gets to do big like fight scenes, and especially with characters like in that Action stuff when he was fighting that Red Cloud, like he can just draw that character the way he wants. It's the quieter stuff that his artwork, it's not what you want him for. You want him for bombastic fighting, destruction. I think the last time for me that he was able to do both very well was when he was doing Amazing Spider-Man with Straczynski. That I loved, because I do like his artwork. I loved Man of Fear that he did.
Oh my God.
Frank Miller, just so good.
Those 5 issues or whatever are some of the most perfect comics ever made.
They really are.
Just amazing.
And I wasn't even reading Daredevil. Like I didn't read the Ann Nocenti, I didn't read that run, but I got those issues because it was like, that's a big deal. Frank Miller,
right.
John Romita. But his Amazing Spider-Man run, woo, and I know again there were people that didn't like it. I was like, I thought it was creative and beautiful, and the story was interesting, and
those are like, that's another great example of, man, I should make time to reread those.
Yeah,
because that was a good run.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't have them anymore, but I'm sure there's some collected editions of those floating around, right? Because it was a big deal.
Marvel app?
Yeah.
I have. They have.
They on there?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have it, but I have to assume they would be.
I mean, they have such like when they're old stuff, it's like a chunk here and a chunk there, and they add a few more issues every month or whatever, like because they got to scan all that stuff in and do all whatever. I don't know, so it's like a thing.
But this was fun. I'm glad we did it, and we were able to finish it. And
if there's any patrons out there that want to pay Peter and I full time to read old comic books and talk about them, I can get on board with that. I'll give you my salary details and my benefits package.
But you're right. Like, I think on Twitter the other week, people were saying, what are the runs you haven't read? And I get embarrassed because I was like, I haven't finished Frank Miller's Daredevil. I never read a Love and Rockets comic. You know,
Me neither.
Mr. Phil has provided me with I haven't read a Hellboy comic. You know, like that's a universe completely alien.
I have 6 of those giant collected edition things.
Oh my god!
I read the first one, and that was it.
Yeah, and it's such a huge universe. Again, you know me. I'm gonna want to read it in order, not in the way that they say to read it. I'm like, no, what came first? That's the one you start with. You know, what's the other one that? Well, I've never finished Sandman. I've read only one issue of Hellblazer. There's 300 issues of that.
Yeah, I only read a couple Hellblazers too. In the when Vertigo started, getting popular, I jumped on, and they were who was the artist on those?
Steve Dillon was on for
Steve
a while.
Dillon.
Yeah.
So that was great because it was Steve Dillon artwork.
Right.
But, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, right? Like that's why I'm saying, like, it's not weird to think that I don't need to read any new comics. Like there's enough existing comics that I haven't read or have forgotten that it keep me busy till my dying breath. Like that's not a problem.
Yeah. I don't think Mr. Phil will mind me saying this. So I talk to Mr. Phil every now and then, right? For people might remember him from Indie Spinner Rack, right? And he's been reading all of Alan Moore's stuff, his complete like bibliography. And he got to, and I'm talking like he read Violator from Spawn,
Yeah.
But he read the Wildcats run that Alan Moore did with Travis Charest and other artists. And Mr. Phil was like, that was actually really good. Like it's Wildcats, but it's really an interesting story. And he said, I didn't read any of the Wildcat issues before it. He just went in cold just because it was Alan Moore. And it's like that's always, I think that's a fun thing to do every now and then, like trying to fill those holes of like your favorite writer, your favorite artist. Like we shouldn't deny ourselves. Like, to know every.
Well, you talk about runs. Like I loved, it took me 4 or 5 issues to get used to it. But after McFarlane left Amazing Spider-Man and Eric Larson took on, the first issue, you hate Eric Larson because you're like, it's not McFarlane. But by 3 issues, you're like, I actually really like this artwork. And then he's your Spider-Man guy. And then Bagley takes over and you're like, ugh, I hate Bagley. And I don't know, what happened to Eric Larson? So I'd like to read Savage Dragon. I got the mini series when it came out, those first 3 issues or whatever, but then I never read the series, and that's still going, right? Like, to the best of my knowledge, there's like 300 and some issues or whatever, right? Of Savage Dragon.
I think it's around like the 260s.
Okay, so but it's a lot.
Yeah, because there's a whole thing like when Spawn hit 300. It got the Guinness Book of World Record, the way it's such a qualifier. They're like the longest running independent superhero comic. Like you can't just say independent because
Cerebus got that
Cerebus, right?
Yeah.
But everybody's like, but you didn't do every issue.
Right.
You might have written it or inked but you didn't draw. Whereas Eric Larson,
writing and drawing, right?
Yeah, right. Like maybe he had to fill in every now and then. I don't know. I don't think so, but whatever. It feels more like, okay, when he reaches 300, I'm going to be a little more celebratory.
Yeah.
Because he actually did it on his own.
And when he reaches 301, then he actually surpasses Cerebus as,
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, some of those issues I look at and they're so zany, but it's, I do sometimes feel like I owe it to comics to read. Like, there's a guy living the dream, every now and then saying ridiculous things on Twitter that are either you agree with or you just sort of laugh at, and he's doing it and he's successful at what he does. And he's not even worried about like making it a cartoon or TV show or whatever. He just wants to do the comic. So
have you ever read much Usagi Yojimbo?
No.
And you definitely should. Like that's a thing where you should at least read the first trade or whatever,
I actually was going to say to you, we should come up with, but I knew you would pick Usagi Yojimbo. We should pick something for the other person to read that they just had never read before, or that would be totally out of your wheelhouse or something like that. Like, but then I thought he's going to make me read Usagi. I know he's going to.
It's good. You'll like it. I mean,
I'm sure I
it's
would.
great comics. I don't know how anybody could not like it.
Yeah.
I could probably pick something different if if that was too obvious.
Yeah, because I thought people would probably say, oh well, then you're going to make him read a Titans book. I'm like, no, I would. That's it's too obvious. Let me find something that I'm like, what would be the thing? Like, not even like for challenging purpose. Just hey, I don't think you've read this, and I think you should.
These are good comics, right?
Yeah, right. Just for that premise alone, like.
Well, I like that. Should that be our next episode?
We should do something.
Pick
like
something,
that.
and we'll just give ourselves a week or something to think about it, and then we'll email each other and say this is the thing I think, and then we'll figure out how to get it.
And if you can't think of something, I'll read Usagi. I just have to get a hold of the issues. But
there's so many different printings of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that could be a fun challenge. So. All right, cool.
No, it's good. And then it's something else to reread, because obviously if we're going to talk about it, I got to reread it.
Got to read it too. Yeah.
I'll just pick something selfish that I just want to reread.
Well, it doesn't have to be long. Like maybe it's a 4-issue storyline.
Yeah.
That's just really good, or 1 issue or something.
Exactly.
I could think if it was just like 1 issue, like a one-off, I could think of a few that would be like, ooh.
I'd like to go back and reread that Spawn Cerebus issue.
Oh yeah, I have that. It's like the 1 issue. I kept 2 Spawn issues because I think I collected up to issue 50. Like I was in it for a while, but I kept the first issue because it has a George Perez pinup in the back. So I was like, gotta keep that. And I kept the Dave Sim one just because I thought that was so cool at the time. Like it was like, this is wild. Yeah. This is wild. So there's podcasts, there's image podcasts that have one podcast in particular. I think it's called like All the Pouches or something like that. And they went back from the beginning and they're reading month to month every image from that amazing time. Yeah, right. And I'm just like, part of me was like, I want to listen, but if I do, all I'm going to want to do is go back and read, Union or some crazy one of those crazy four like Tribe or
somebody just put it's funny, like Tribe, right? That was the X Factor guy,
Larry
Stroman, man. Like I loved his work on X Factor so much, it was so quirky and weird for X Factor, but that's like when X Factor got quirky and weird.
Right.
And now it sort of has a legacy of being like a little weird and offbeat. Yeah. But it was a straight up superhero comic for years before that. And then all of a sudden it got weird and then it got so good. So like I'd like to go reread those because that was still Peter David when he was writing it and Larry Stroman was drawing it. Like I'd love to reread that.
Oh, see, there you go. Peter David's Hulk. I've read maybe 3 issues of that.
I read 5 of the Visionaries trades. Wow. But that, he did that book for 10 years.
I know.
So 5 trades is only a drop in the bucket of his run.
Yeah.
And then, because then you get to those issues with
Gary Frank or Dale Keown.
Dale Keown, right? Because then that begets Pitt, right? And so
right.
When you're talking about early Image, it's like, oh, you got to go read the Peter David Hulk because that was so good. I mean, the whole thing was good, but that stuff with
do you have Amazon Prime? Do you have there's an Image documentary on there?
Oh yeah.
That it's probably a lot of stuff you already know, but I still found it interesting because they showed clips from back then, and the way they put it together, this whole notion of it started out with 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then like the biggest names of Marvel just one day just went to the offices and said goodbye, and then did the same thing at DC and said goodbye, and then took along these. It just the way it lays out, it's like, and they show clips of people lining up for signatures from back in the early 90s, you know, and you're like looking at these guys with like jackets and you know, like from its 90s wear, and they're like, these are so cool, you know, the way they're talking about the Image comics. It's a really good documentary. I really liked it. Even though I knew a lot of that stuff, there was every now and then there was a couple of things I was like, oh wow, I didn't know that, or it was cool to see. So if anybody hasn't seen it, it's worth it.
I love that journey. Somebody in the CGS Facebook group just today posted about they wanted to go back and discover the Lee who did the Namor book. Why can't I just think of his name?
Oh, Jay Lee,
right? Yeah. Because they like came out of nowhere and drew Namor. It was totally different, right? And that journey of starting to love like different artwork. So like I remember getting Spider-Man every month, or one of the Spider-Man books. There was 3, so I couldn't get them all, right? But I get a Spider-Man book whenever I could. And then I got my first, whichever issue it was. It wasn't the first one, but it was one of the McFarlane Spider-Mans, and I was like, this is gross. It's so weird. It doesn't look like Spider-Man, right? Because every other book was like house style. And then at some point, a thing clicked in my head, and I was like, no, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I wanted all of the awesome, right? I wanted to read all the Simonson stuff. I wanted to read Byrne stuff. I wanted it because it was different. And so that just led right into the 90s. You read X-Men, and then it's like, oh, Silvestri, and oh, Jim Lee, and oh, these guys are different. And then the normal house style was crap. Like, even if it was good, it was crap. Like, I wasn't interested in it as a 14 or 15-year-old or whatever, right? And then Image comes along, and you're just right along for the ride, because you're like, this is all I want to look at. I don't want to look at house style. I don't need to pick up a DC comic ever because they all look exactly the same. Look at this Image stuff. Like, it was totally a time and place.
Mm-hmm.
And my age definitely had to do with it too. Absolutely. Right? Like, I was a perfect age for that, because in 1992 I was 18 years old, and it was like all about style.
McFarlane says it in the documentary. He says, I was drawing for the 14 and 15-year-olds, that we're going to think that a guy with chains is cool.
Yeah.
And he was right, Everybody dug it. I actually like those early issues. They're something about them, those early Spawn. I think I came to McFarlane because of Batman Year 2 and Infinity Inc. Like before I think that was before the Amazing Spider-Man stuff. Yeah. And I just was like, wow, you can draw stuff in the gutters? Like, you can draw little, he would just draw like an hourglass for Hour Man. Yeah. Like, just I'm like, well, that don't make sense, but like, that's cool,
Yeah.
And capes are 5 miles long, but it makes sense, like, yeah, I dug all that. It's like the first time, I tell this story all the time. The first time when New Mutants goes from whoever is before Sienkiewicz and then lands on Sienkiewicz during the Demon Bear saga, and you're like, I'm sorry, what is happening? Right. And it's the greatest 3 issues. I still have those issues. I didn't sell them. They're still Marvel did like a one-shot just recently revisiting that story with Sienkiewicz and Claremont, and I bought it. I still haven't read it, but I have it. Like I was like, this is amazing. Now that's on a whole other level. Like,
sure, I mean, Sienkiewicz, right?
Yeah, but you're right. Like, it's very rare to read sort of like you're reading along, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, what is this? Who is this? Like, oh my God, this is gorgeous, or different or whatever. Yeah.
Did I tell you? I can't remember if we talked about this last episode or not, but at a Heroes Con years ago, our table was across from some guy selling, $5 trades or whatever. Mm-hmm. And Hickman comes over to our table to chat, and he's holding a hardcover, reprint of Long Shot miniseries. And he got it at that table for only $5, right? It's all 6 issues. And he's like, I never read this. I gotta read this. This is great, right?
Wow.
So I ran over to the table because I never read it, and I know it's Art Adams, and I'm like, oh, I gotta get this, right? So I bought it then. I was like 10 years ago, and it's been on my shelf ever since. And just a couple months ago, like in the spring, I was like, I'm gonna read this long shot. That's terrible. I mean, the artwork is cool, but oh my God, I read 2 issues. I'm like, I cannot do this. This is not worth my time. This is so bad. I don't. Oh
It's not the
God.
greatest story. It's not the greatest story. I've never been a fan of Mojoverse. Like when Mojo pops up in the X-Men book, I'm like, oh God, not this guy, you know. But the artwork is beautiful.
Yeah.
The one that sold it. So the junior high and high school friends that I had, that we used to go to the Golden Eagle on 5th Street in Reading, because it was on the way to Reading High. I remember when those 2 Asgard issue specials came out, and it was Art Adams on the artwork, but the story was good too. And we were just like, you know, that was our Image before Image. Like, who is this guy? And he's doing the long shot. He's doing that. And then he did a cover for Burns Action Comics with Superman and Batman. Like, he was starting to do DC stuff, and he would pop up like in Who's Who every now and then. And just, that was the first, I think that was for me, that was even before McFarlane and all that, that was the first artist that was just like, beyond even what Sienkiewicz was. Everybody was sort of freaking out about him at the same time.
Well, for me, it was, he did those 3 fill-in issues on Simonson's Fantastic Four, where he draw Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and
right.
you know, whatever. And I was like, what is this? Right? Like, I have those issues because I had them all bound, right? I had Simonson's Fantastic Four bound, including the 3 Art Adams issues, because they're so beautiful. Well, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and who?
I thought it was Hulk.
Was it Hulk? Maybe it was.
Yeah.
Oh, those are so. We should reread those. We should read those 3 issues, man. I mean,
we could do like the whole Simonson thing. Like, keep going on Thor.
Go to Fantastic Four.
Go to Fantastic Four. I didn't finish Orion. Like, I read
that was good. I don't know. I got rid of the issues.
They might be on the DCU app.
They might be. God, I loved that.
And Nocenti wrote the long shot.
Yeah, no, I know that. Yeah.
That's funny. Will Sportasio was an inker. That's kind of interesting.
On those issues?
Yeah.
Wow.
From 1985. Yeah.
I didn't realize he was working on stuff that early.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, we'll let's do the
surprise thing
plan. Yeah, we'll get that going, and then we'll like either go back to Simonson or just, you know, we don't want to make it a chore.
No, but we could, you know, we should read some more of this.
I would like to know how it.
Yeah, for sure. So many issues, Peter.
I know.
Let me see the last issue here. What issue is this?
Well, especially because we're not digging in deep, you know. We're just
382.
Jesus mighty. That's 30 issues.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look at it and we'll see. I'm sure if we start reading, like, there'll be a definite sort of like, well, here's 7 issues.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll figure it out what it is, and next time we record, listeners will hear what our choices are. Yeah. And then we'll either have 2 conversations where we're really digging it, or one of them will be like, I can't believe you made me read this shit.
I don't think I like anything that divisive.
Cool.
Maybe. Cool.
All right. We'll see you all next time. This was fun.